People who have taken an ancestry DNA test and accidentally uncovered a family secret. What was it? My male cousin did one and found a female cousin we did not know about. He reached out to her and apparently our deceased uncle was good friends with her mother. Mom wanted a baby, so uncle got her pregnant simply as a sperm donor. Female cousin lived a few blocks away from my grandmother. She had met her a few times going around selling Girl Scout cookies or something. My grandmother had no idea that she was buying cookies from her granddaughter. On the flip side, my dad used to say my mom slept around and none of the three of us were his kids. Welp, thanks to the test, we know all three of us are. A friend discovered that her father was not really her father. Her mom had an affair and she was the result. It tore her family apart. Her father did not know he was not really her father. A full 100% older brother. My mother got pregnant by my father before they were married. Scandalous in 1960. So, with my father's knowledge of the situation, Mom left town, and lived with my aunt until the birth. Mom gave the baby up for adoption, and then returned home. A couple years later, she married my dad and had 3 more children together, including me. 55 years later, after both my parents had died, my aunt let it slip that me and my siblings that were not the only children of our parents. To paraphrase from Star Wars, there is another. My sister took a DNA test, and a couple of years later she got a hit. Soon thereafter, we met our new big brother and his family, wife, kids, and have become quite close. My real father and 3 half-siblings. It ended up being a really good discovery. My ex-husband's family were proud of their Dutch heritage and claimed to be one of the founding families of the historically Dutch Holland, MI. His ancestry results didn't show any Dutch ancestry. Instead, he had primarily English/Irish ancestry. My wife is adopted, but found her bio mom, and did one of the genetic tests. Someone matched with her and asked if she knew such and such a name. She found out her bio dad wasn't married to the bio mom. It was her boss. Oops. So, I did the health DNA 18 months ago because I wanted to see if I had the breast cancer gene, as there is several incidences on both sides of my family. Got my results and became very confused. It claimed I had no Italian despite my father's grandma literally coming over from Sicily in 1920. It took me a few minutes to realize what that actually meant. My parents have been together since my mother was 14, I was born when she was 17, and my father joined the military and married my mother. Called my mom and she literally said, "That's interesting." Then she asked me not to talk to my father and she would explain everything the next time I visited. She did not, and just refused I talk about it. Honestly, I was just shook. I did not see it coming and it was never even presented to be a possibility to me. My sister ended up doing a DNA test and it showed that we were half-siblings. I went no contact with my mother 4 months ago, due to this incident and several others. I haven't told my dad, but I realize at some point the truth is going to come out. My sister matched with some of my father's relatives while I did not, so if anyone checks that shit, they're gonna be asking questions. A woman over in Chicago decided to find out who her real parents were. She was getting close to 60 and realized that there may not be much time left to find her father. So through the magic of ancestry she was matched to my grandfather. She reached out to him and told him who her mother was. He didn't recognize the name but dug up his little black book and lo and behold, there she was. So now I've got a new aunt. My dad has a cousin living in Utah. The family has always lived in Pennsylvania. For the timing to work, his grandfather hooked up prior to coming to the US in 1918, or his grandmother had a kid and gave it up when she was like 14. Either way, that kid would have been my dad's aunt/uncle, which we never knew about. That my father is a registered sex offender, parents are divorced. Found out I have a different father. My dad also took a DNA test at the same time and found out his father, of 52 years, was not his biological father either. As it turns out, I come from a line of bastards. This wasn't really a secret because no one even knew, but I'm related to Cheddar Man, the dark-skinned blue-eyed caveman discovered in Somerset. I found a half-sister that none of my siblings or mother knew about. My dad had an affair 50 years ago, he's dead now. For us it wasn't really a surprise, we already have a half-sister from another affair, but for the newly discovered one it answered a lot of questions and gave her some needed closure. We all met a few times, it was pleasant. Not me, but a family friend. He did the test and found out he had a half-brother. Turns out his dad had an affair a while back, and that kid was a product of that affair. Not me, but a friend never knew who his father was. Mom had a weekend fling in college and never contacted the guy after, and his wife helped him use Ancestry.com to try and track him down. My friend reached out and the guy was obviously surprised, but flew across the country to meet him. They have a great relationship now, the dad attended his wedding, and they try to get their families together a couple times a year or so. I found out that my dad is not my biological father. Turns out the family friend I grew up calling Grandpa is. Oh yeah, and he was also my mom's bariatric surgeon. Felt weird, man. I have an uncle that was put up for adoption. He contacted my grandma and she thought he was going to extort her, they're well off. Turns out he's a multi-millionaire on his own. They still have limited contact, though my dad has reached out and formed a relationship. Apparently they look exactly alike and have the same personality, which sounds kind of stupid now that I'm writing it out, but they're only half-siblings. I am the family secret. Family discovered their brother/cousin/son and his wife had 3 children and gave them all up for adoption, after matching with me through a DNA test. They were shocked to say the least, but we're all pretty close now. My sister is almost half Hispanic, no traces of my father's DNA. And I'm 1% Ashkenazi Jewish. None of these fit with the DNA tests they took the previous year. My Phil found out he's the milkman's son, so to speak, and everyone else including his sister knew. It explained why they treat his wife and kids like black sheep. My aunt discovered that her mother cheated on her father and she was a product of that affair, meaning she was actually only half-siblings with her 4 siblings. The rub was that my aunt's husband was married before he married her. The woman he was married to is the daughter of the man involved in the affair. So no one knew this, but my uncle got divorced and then married his ex-wife's half-sister. I guess he has a type. Nez Perce blood. We always suspected, you just had to look at my uncle, father, myself, and my sister to some extent, and you could see Indian. Confirmed. Result of an extramarital affair. My cousin took a test and goes on and on about how she's almost completely Irish. Our grandpa was German. I'd heard from my mom as a kid that my aunt's biological father was probably her friend's father. I've looked the family up on Facebook and my aunt looks just that friend. My cousin seems to have no idea of any of this. I don't think my aunt does either. My wife no longer knows who her father is. We are about to approach her mom about this, but that's a delicate relationship balance to approach due to her mom being very straight-laced and proper. It's shook my wife for 5F entire foundation. She was from 6 generations of Texans, now she is lost. I don't know how to help her. She is not real interested in finding out who her real father is yet. She is also relieved because the man she thought was her father is a weird asshole. I wish her dad, her mom's current husband of 40 years, was her real dad, though he did legally adopt her years ago when the guy she thought was her dad abandoned her. It's a mess. Hard pass on the DNA tests for me, I'm good being just 90% fucked up. I have a half-sister, except she found out before I did. My dad and aunt found out they had an older brother. Long story, my grandfather had a fling before he met my grandmother, never even knew he had a son, went and lived his life, and some near 60 years later, boom. Ancestry test, here you go. So another really good story from this one. My paternal grandfather was 50/50ths African and American Seminole Indian. Awesome. My bio dad left his family and 2 daughters in Washington and married my mom in Los Angeles 5 weeks later. I found his first marriage certificate but nothing about a divorce. I'm pretty sure he was a bigamist. I knew about being conceived using art, but I didn't know about the Duggar-ish number of half-siblings I had from the same sperm donor. Frankly, it blindsided my parents too. Always thought my grandfather on my father's side was adopted and thought our last name was just of the family that adopted him. One DNA test later and the family figures out that my great-grandparents got pregnant out of marriage and ran away. They came back with a child saying it was adopted so they wouldn't be shamed for him. That's how we figured out that my last name is for sure from blood. This one is a dowsy. Some guy in Texas took a DNA test. My grandma took a DNA test a year earlier in Utah. Found out they were siblings. Same father. They have met and are literally best friends. Talk on the phone daily and send each other care packages in the mail. It's nuts. Actually, everything in my DNA test matched up with family history. My uncle and dad have traced my paternal side of my family back to 900s. Mom's side of the family isn't quite so researched, but also an old established early American immigrant family from the 1600s. I did find an ancestor who was in Jamestown. She was Irish and a lady. That makes me pleased to find out. We are all closely related. That is the secret. This is how the Golden State Killer was caught. My wife's grandmother had 10 kids by what she said was 6 different men. Well, she told my wife's mother her dad was a guy that was 100% Native American. My wife got a test and was 0% Native American. Awkward. I am whiter than Casper the Friendly Ghost. North Sea and Scandinavian genetics. My real father raised me, found my birth father. I am great-great-great. Distant great cousin to Henry VIII. My father-in-law had a child back in the 60s. He was a really nice guy. Didn't want any money or anything, just wanted to say thanks for putting him up for adoption instead of abortion. He had a good foster family and turned out well-rounded. Also, it turned out he lived a few miles from my in-laws' yearly vacation spot. They met up and had a few beers and caught up. The birth mother wasn't as cool. She was a grandma and didn't want to spoil her identity. To each their own. I found my father wasn't my father and I wasn't half the beautiful ethnicity I thought I was. Turns out I'm half Irish. Apart from now feeling opaque, it's the best thing that ever happened. Through therapy realized I had major attachment issues growing up. Things fell into place. A weight lifted off my shoulders realizing I wasn't the root of all evil. Now I can start my healing journey. It's late in life but never too late. Apparently that kid I was fighting with on Xbox was right. A long-lost relative contacted me. He is the same age as my dad and looked straight-up related. He was adopted and wanted to connect with his birth family. Long story short, I found out that my grandfather had an affair with my great-aunt and they put the baby up for adoption. My great-aunt went away while she was pregnant and came back with no baby. It was the 60s. The family was freaking out about it, trying to keep it all hush-hush. I felt bad for the guy, so I did my best to help him out. So technically, he's my uncle/cousin. And we live in Kentucky, which makes it even funnier. I don't know about secrets, but I have a cousin, deceased, who was a famous suffragette and helped pioneer a women's rights movement. Also found who my grandma's grandma was. Her mother never really knew her because she died when she was really young. Oddly, both sides of my family say we have Native American relatives, but nothing Native American shows up in the analysis. I think the tests may not be fully accurate, but probably close enough because it didn't put anything crazy in there that we obviously are not. Didn't took any test, but by scratching my family tree I found out that I am the uncle of the mother of some kids I grew up with. I am 15. She is 46. I was adopted as a baby and was looking for my birth family. I ended up connecting with a lady who similarly in the dark and was also looking to connect with her father's family. Apparently her father hated his father for unknown reasons. But she did know her grandfather's name, and through that I was able to do some research and was able to find my birth mother. Talking to my birth aunt, who keeps track of all the family records, that lady's unfamiliar grandfather was my great-grandfather. But my aunt/grandmother/ pretty much everyone else in the family had no memory of these other people. Turns out that the families were living just a few blocks away from each other at the same time. The guy had a whole other family he kept secret. TLDR, went looking for my birth family and discovered that my birth great-grandfather had a second family down the street and they didn't know about each other. My aunt believes that she discovered her real father was her mother's longtime casino buddy. They had an odd dynamic where he was her husband's best friend and they would go to the casino once a month while staying overnight in the same room. Her husband trusted his friend so much that he encouraged them to go together so that his friend could protect her and keep her on a budget. I personally doubt my aunt's story because she claims that 23andMe sent her a letter with the addresses of her living half-siblings, though she can't produce the letter, and for them to do so would probably be very illegal. Additionally, I don't believe that the test she took was supposed to be anything more than a risk assessment for potential genetic predispositions, but I could be wrong. Turns out, my parents are very distant cousins, like 12 generations back, still pretty wild though. Neanderthal. That I'm related to the British royal family. Not my story, but someone very close to me discovered that none of the ethnic background that they were expecting was present in the results. This person, whose father was deceased at the time, questioned their mother. The mother admitted that the person's father was not biological as they believed their entire life, they were older than 40. The mother gave the name of the biological father. My friend then found the biological father, contacted him, and then discovered that they had several one-half siblings. The biological father was unaware he had another child and accepted my friend into his family, as did the siblings. Not me, but an elderly customer at work the other day. She came down with some serious illness and the doctor had her take a DNA test to see if it was hereditary. Turns out it was from her father's side. But not the man who raised her. So she went hunting to find her real father. Turns out that he was a Korean War vet. Took part in Chosin Reservoir and loads of other things. 2 years after she found him and all of her half-siblings, he passed. My mother's husband, father of my siblings both younger and older, the man I called Dad since birth, is not genetically related to me. Oops. I didn't find one, but I was really hoping to. I get asked a lot if I'm native, and can kind of understand why. Long straight black hair, dark eyes, and my skin has a bit of a reddish hue when I tan. On top of that, my great-great-grandma got pregnant while living in North Dakota and refused to tell who the father was. Nothing conclusive in itself, but enough to make me wonder. Got a test and not even a trace of native DNA. However, a few years after my sister and I got ours done, most of my extended family followed. Everyone's profile looks mostly the same, except one of my cousins. His is noticeably different. Since my aunt died a few years earlier, we decided just to leave it alone. Also, around 98 or so, my mom was contacted by a sister she didn't know she had.